My name is Victoria Baker, and I'm 44 years old. Back in 1998, my father struck it rich at a natural gas field down in Texas. He came home, and he brought a young woman with him, poured into a pair of tight black leather pants. He didn't even bother setting his suitcase down on the rug. He walked through the front door, and the very first words out of his mouth were that he wanted a divorce. My mother, the woman who'd gone through hell and high water with him, who'd eaten dirt and scraped by for the better half of her life, started shaking from head to toe. She grabbed the aluminum baseball bat leaning in the corner by the door, her eyes shot through with red, ready to charge outside, smash that shiny Lincoln to pieces, and run those two lowlifes off our property. But she didn't do it. Not because her anger cooled. Because she had me. And because I managed to lean in close to her ear and say one sentence, just one, in the 3 short seconds before that bat came down. One sentence that changed the entire course of 2 lives. Back then, on that miserable day in 1998, I still went by Emma, a skinny 16-year-old in thick glasses, growing up in a dying industrial town in Pennsylvania. And I'm about to tell you how the two of us stripped that fat cat millionaire down to the bone. It all started a few days before that fateful afternoon. In small-town America, secrets don't exist. Least of all, in my Uncle Joe's auto shop, the beating heart of every rumor in that town, where men would change their oil and spill every piece of gossip in the county, right there in the smell of gasoline and the hiss of the air compressor. That day, I was sitting on an empty oil drum working through my math homework when I overheard 2 mechanics whispering. They said they'd just seen Richard, my father, driving the fanciest car in the county, a solid gold Rolex on his wrist. He'd hit it big, down in Texas. And more importantly, riding shotgun was some young blonde, young enough to be his granddaughter. Richard's a new man, one of them chuckled, wiping his hands on a grease-black rag. Brand new Lincoln. And that girl, Lord, she's barely legal. Money really does buy a whole new life. My ears started ringing. The pencil in my hand froze right in the middle of the page. For the last 1.5 years, my father had used business out of state as his excuse, sending home the occasional crumpled check, never quite enough for my mother to cover the heating bill. Pennsylvania winters cut you to the bone, and some months the two of us slept in 3 layers of sweaters because we didn't dare turn on the furnace. Meanwhile, down in Texas, he was wearing a solid gold Rolex and driving some strange woman around in a gleaming Lincoln. I didn't tell my mother. My mom, Sarah, had suffered enough. She worked 3 shifts a day, her hands cracked and calloused, smelling of machine oil from the garment factory and window cleaner from the diner. Mornings at the sewing machine, afternoons waiting tables, evenings mopping office floors. Some nights she'd come home, her feet swollen, drop into a chair, and fall asleep before she could even get her shoes off. I wasn't about to break her heart before I had proof, so I looked into it myself. In 1998, the internet was still a luxury. In our house, even the landline was rationed by the minute. So I biked the 4 miles to the town library, that dusty old place, with the librarian whose glasses were thick as the bottom of a Coke bottle, and used one of those computers with a dial-up connection that crawled. The modem screeched and whined for a full minute before it finally connected. With a little of the sharpness I'd picked up from financial message boards, I was the bookworm. I read everything, even the business pages nobody else in my class would glance at. I typed in the name of the company Uncle Joe's mechanics had mentioned, Apex Energy. The screen loaded slower than molasses. The words trickled in, 1 line at a time. I sat there, heart pounding, gripping the edge of the desk. And then I found it. A small item in a financial paper. Apex Energy is preparing for its initial public offering, its IPO. Richard Baker, a member of the board, holds a substantial number of shares. I read it 3 times to make sure my eyes weren't playing tricks on me. I printed the page out. It cost me $0.25, nearly all the loose change in my pocket, folded it into quarters, and buried it at the bottom of my backpack, tucked inside my math book. My heart hammered the whole ride home. My father wasn't just rich. He was about to become a genuine millionaire. So why was he hiding it from us? Why would a man about to make millions leave his wife and daughter shivering in a wooden house, too broke to run the heat? The answer came that Friday afternoon. And it was crueler than anything I'd imagined. The black Lincoln Navigator lurched to a stop in front of our withered front lawn, its two tires grinding over the weeds like our house wasn't even worth braking gently for. Richard stepped out, followed by Chloe, the girl smacking her gum, wearing a pink crop top and those ridiculous skin-tight black leather pants. She pulled off her sunglasses, wrinkled her nose at our rickety wooden house like she was looking at a garbage dump, and pinched her nostrils as she stepped over the rotting porch boards. When they pushed the door open, my mother was in the kitchen, kneading dough. She was making bread. It was the one thing she'd held on to from the happy years. Every weekend, no matter how broke we were, she'd knead dough and bake a loaf so the house would smell warm. The sweet smell of my mother's bread was instantly crushed under the reek of that girl's cheap, overpowering perfume. Richard didn't say hello. Not one word for his daughter. He tossed his designer leather briefcase onto the sofa. His voice was ice cold, like he was talking to a stranger he'd just met on the street. "Sarah, sign here. Uncontested divorce. My lawyer already drew it up. I'll leave you $20,000, cash. Enough to see out the rest of your days in this dump. Sign it, and Chloe and I are gone. $20,000. Folks, he was trying to buy out 18 years of my mother's life for $20,000. 18 years of scrubbing toilets, standing at a sewing machine, waiting tables, selling every drop of sweat to feed him and to feed me. He was going to package all of it into one number, set it on the table, and walk away. My mother stood frozen. Her flour-dusted hands trembled. She looked at the man in front of her, the man she'd once sold her own father's keepsake to save, then looked at the young blonde, smirking and draping herself over her husband's arm. The girl spoke up, her voice shrill and grating. "You ought to know your place, honey. A man with money belongs with a woman who's got looks. Take a good look at yourself. You're no better than the cleaning lady. Quit standing there wasting our time." The cleaning lady. That girl had no idea that was exactly the work my mother had done all those years to feed the man now standing beside her. My mother was proud of those calloused hands. It was those cleaning lady hands that made sure I never went hungry a single day. My mother's patience snapped. She snatched up my aluminum baseball bat from the corner of the kitchen. Her eyes went bloodshot, radiating pure fury. Her whole body shook, not from fear, but from 18 years of bottled-up rage finally boiling over. "Get out. Get out of my house. Before I cave in both your skulls." Richard and Chloe scrambled back toward the door. The glass of water in Chloe's hand hit the floor and shattered. The fat lawyer who'd come along, a jowly man in gold-rimmed glasses, clutching a leather bag ducked behind Richard, his face white as a sheet. But while everyone's attention was locked on the baseball bat in my mother's hands, I, standing in the dark corner of the living room, spotted the chance of a lifetime. Richard's expensive leather briefcase was sitting right there on the sofa. The latch hadn't clicked all the way shut. I darted over like a squirrel. Slipping into the blind spot, out of everyone's line of sight, I flipped the case open. Inside were folders, clamped in stiff binders. My hands shook. My eyes raced across the bold print. Valuation audit report, Apex Energy. Shareholder register, Richard Baker. And then the number blazing in the top right corner. Estimated value of equity stake, $4.5 million. $4.5 million. And he was tossing his loyal wife of 18 years a lousy 20 grand. But the most valuable thing wasn't that number. At the bottom of the folder was a yellow sticky note, scrawled by hand. Must pressure Sarah to sign the divorce agreement before Oct 15 to ensure she has no claim on the IPO shares. I shot a glance at the calendar on the kitchen wall. Today was the 12th. 3 days until the 15th. He was racing the clock. He wanted to steal everything before the company went public, before the law could count those shares as marital property. That man's entire scheme, I had it in the palm of my hand in 10 seconds flat. Out on the porch, my mother had already raised the bat high. One more heartbeat and it would come crashing down, the Lincoln's windows would shatter, and both our lives would shatter right along with them, in a police station, on an assault charge. I stuffed the documents under the sofa cushion, clicked the briefcase shut like nothing had happened, and shot out onto the porch like an arrow. I threw my arms around my mother's waist, using every ounce of my weight to hold her back. "Mom? Stop." She fought me, tears streaming down her face. "Let go of me, Emma. I have to kill this bastard." I stood on my toes, pressed my lips right against her ear, and fired the words out like a machine gun, hoarse but clear as a bell. "Mom, listen to me. Don't hit him." I just saw the files in his briefcase. The rumors are true. His company's about to go public. It's worth millions. He's forcing you to sign today so he can hide the money. If you hit him, the cops take you away, and we lose everything. This bat can only break a car window, Mom. Drop it. Act. Cry your heart out. Bring up the old debts. Ask him for the rundown block on Main Street. And ask for 10% of the company in my name. Don't take the cash. Hit him in the wallet, not with a weapon. Time seemed to stop. I could feel my mother's heart slamming against her ribs beneath the coarse fabric of her shirt. I could feel her whole body pulled tight as a violin string about to snap. Then, all at once, she let out a long breath. An icy calm ran down through her body. I felt the muscles in her arms go slack under my hands. The rage was still there. It didn't vanish, but it had just moved from her hands up into her head. She let go. The aluminum bat hit the wooden floor with a clatter. That was the first time my mother put the bat down. And folks, that dry little clack times of metal against hardwood, that was the sound of a life turning the page. If they gave out an Oscar for real-life acting, my mother earned one that year. She slid down onto the porch steps, buried her face in her hands, and wept. But it wasn't the crying of a beaten, cornered woman. It was the calculated unraveling of 18 years of resentment placed exactly right, at exactly the right moment, in front of exactly the right audience. You want a divorce? Fine. But you think my youth, my whole life, is only worth $20,000, Richard? My father, seeing her drop the weapon, slipped right back into his usual arrogance. He brushed off his sleeve like he'd just dodged a rabid dog. Business is tough. All the money's tied up in equipment. 20 grand is more than generous for an uneducated woman like you. Uneducated. That was my father's go-to phrase. He said it to my mother whenever he wanted to end an argument. And you know what? It was only years later that I understood why he was so obsessed with those two words, educated and money. Because there'd been a time when he was the one people called the poor, uneducated kid. My mother looked up, her grief-stricken eyes fixed not on Richard, but on the fat lawyer hovering behind him. She was smart enough to know, don't plead to Richard. Plead to the witness. Aim for the pity of the third party, the one whose presence forced Richard to keep up appearances. Tough? My mother's voice cracked, trembling but clear. When you were 25 and your lumberyard went under, when the loan sharks from the east side came to this house threatening to cut off your hands, do you remember? You knelt right there on that floor, wrapped your arms around my legs, and cried. Who worked 3 shifts straight, scrubbing toilets at the bus station to pay off every dollar of your interest? When you needed money for a truck ticket down to Texas, who sold the last Ford her dead father left her to put cash in your hand? You swore on my father's grave you'd give me and our daughter a decent life. And now you're throwing us away for this brainless little tramp? I noticed that when my mother mentioned him kneeling on that floor, Richard's face twitched. And that twitch, it took me years to understand it. My father grew up in a slum. My grandfather was a drunk carpenter who died buried in debt. Richard's whole childhood was loan sharks pounding on the door, kids calling him the drunk carpenter's boy, getting thrown out of class because he couldn't pay tuition. The year the loan sharks threatened his hands, he tasted the same humiliation he'd known as a child. When you're poor, people treat you like trash. From the day that gas field in Texas gushed money, something inside him broke, and his loyal wife, the woman who'd watched him kneel, watched him weep, watched him grovel, became living proof of the past he wanted to bury. Leaving my mother, to him, was erasing the man he used to be. I understand that. But understanding is not forgiving. The tragedy of the strong doesn't give them the right to crush the weak. He had a choice, and he chose wrong. Chloe, seething, made to jump in and snap back, but Richard barked at her to shut her mouth. He had his pride. He didn't want to be seen as an ungrateful traitor, not wanting the lawyer, at least, the man who'd carry this story back to every business contact he had in Texas. I'm not a heartless man, Richard growled, straining to look generous. How much do you want? 30,000? I'll figure something out. My mother shook her head. She reached over and stroked my hair, the perfect picture of a poor mother and daughter, pitiful beyond words. The lawyer took one look and quietly lowered his eyes. I don't need your cash. A country woman gets her hands on a pile of money. She doesn't know how to keep it, spends it in a few years, and it's gone, my mother said, her voice so meek I almost believed it myself. All I need is a safe roof over my head. That rundown block on Main Street. It's sitting empty anyway, you're just wasting money paying taxes on it. Sign it over to me so I've got somewhere to run a little corner store. Richard's brow furrowed slightly. The Main Street block sat in a dead industrial zone. The real estate was worth next to nothing right now. I could see him doing the math. Give up a pile of rubble to buy his own peace and quiet a bargain. And 10% of shares in whatever that company of yours in Texas is. In Emma's name, my mother went on, her tone like she was begging for some trivial little thing. I don't care if that company goes bankrupt or strikes gold. But Emma carries the Baker name. She should have something from her father so she can go to school someday, not end up washing dishes like her mother. I held my breath. This was the deciding moment. If Richard was clear-headed enough to realize those 10% of shares were the very thing he was trying to hide, the whole plan would fall apart. Richard turned to the lawyer. The lawyer whispered in his ear. I could guess what he was saying. Something like 10% of non-voting shares, no float yet, worth next to nothing on paper and in the daughter's name. So image-wise, you even come off as the responsible father. Sign it and be done. Safe before the 15th. The corner of my father's mouth curled up. He thought he was the old wolf who'd just fleeced a dumb little lamb. He thought he was tossing his wife and kid a few table scraps in exchange for a signature and his freedom. He had no idea that he was the one being stripped down to the bone. Fine. The Main Street block? It's yours. 10% in an educational trust for Emma. Agreed. Tell the lawyer to redraw the papers right now. Chloe shrieked, stamping her feet on the floor. Are you insane? Property? Shares? I'm carrying your son. You have to leave everything to our child. The whole room went dead silent. Chloe clapped a hand over her mouth. She'd just shown her hand. She'd just let it slip that she hadn't come here for love, she'd come for Richard's fortune, and she was terrified of losing her cut. My mother's eyes flashed cold at the words, carrying your son. But she kept perfect control. She ignored the girl's existence entirely, like she was nothing but a shadow on the wall. That was the ultimate insult, not even worth a reply. With a valid signature transferring the property and certifying the shares, my mother said to Richard, cutting Chloe out completely, "I'll sign the uncontested divorce. Right now." 15 minutes later, on our cramped kitchen table, still hazy with cooking smoke, the lawyer spread out the papers and edited a few lines with an expensive fountain pen. Sharp strokes went down onto the page. The moment my mother put pen to that divorce agreement, I knew our lives had officially turned the page. Richard gathered up the documents, satisfied, and slid them into his leather briefcase, the briefcase he never knew had just been ransacked. He led Chloe out to the car. Before getting in, Chloe turned back to my mother with a contemptuous smile and threw out a line I'd end up repeating to myself many times over the years. "You idiot. Have fun scraping by on those rundown little shops. Have fun scraping by on those rundown little shops." My mother didn't answer. We stood on the porch and watched that fancy car roll away, leaving behind a haze of dust and the smell of exhaust. When the car finally disappeared around the far bend of the street, my mother's legs gave out. She sank down onto the porch steps. I rushed to catch her. "You were incredible, Mom," I said, gripping her hand. It was ice cold. My mother wiped her tears. The weakness vanished clean, like a mask being lifted away. She looked at me, her eyes sharp as a knife. "Emma, you're sure about what you said? That company, it's worth millions?" I ran inside, slid my hand under the sofa cushion, pulled out the documents I'd hidden, and pressed them into her hands. $4.5 million. Mom, that's the valuation. Next week, they go public. 10% of that is at least $450,000. And the Main Street block. I dropped my voice, even though there was no one left around. I read the zoning maps at the library. Next year, the government's opening a highway right through there to connect to the interstate. The price is going to jump several times over. What Chloe called those run-down little shops, Mom, they're about to sit right on the frontage of a main artery. My mother's hands trembled as she smoothed the black and white paper. Over $400,000. Double what she could earn scrubbing toilets nonstop for the next 30 years. She burst out laughing. A bitter laugh, but full of pride. He thinks he outsmarted us. I slipped an arm around her shoulder and smiled, cold and sharp. "No, Mom. We just gutted him. He threw us what he thought was garbage. But Mom, one fool's garbage is a smart eye's gold. Mom, we are never going to be poor again." My mother pulled me into her arms. She looked up at the gray Pennsylvania sky and took a deep breath in like it was the first full breath she'd managed in 18 years. "Start packing, Emma. Next week, once the paperwork comes through, we're leaving this rotten town." "Where are we going, Mom?" I asked. "Seattle." Her eyes lit up with something I'd never seen before. "That place is booming. Real estate, tech, all of it. People are pouring in to make their fortunes. With this dividend money, we're going to start playing a much bigger game. We're going to start over. Not from zero. From 400,000. Before going inside, I bent down and picked up the baseball bat, still lying on the floor where it had fallen that afternoon. I wiped the dust off it and stood it back in the corner by the door. I don't know why I kept it. I just felt like that bat still had work left to do. The first week of November, a certified letter from Texas landed in the rusty mailbox in front of our house. Inside were the documents certifying the educational trust in my name, along with a check the first dividend paid out after Apex Energy officially went public. My mother sat right down on the living room floor, pressing the check to her chest. $96,000. And that was only the first quarter's dividend. She didn't cry. She'd already cried enough for a whole lifetime. She reached for the landline and dialed a real estate agent in Seattle she'd contacted ahead of time through a newspaper classified. Her voice was steady, decisive, not a trace left of the woman who'd knelt weeping on the porch a month earlier. That afternoon, we packed. Our entire fortune fit into 4 suitcases. We handed the keys to the Main Street block over to Uncle Joe to manage, asked him to keep an eye on it, and boarded a plane out of Pennsylvania. I brought the baseball bat. Mom told me to leave it behind to lighten the load, but I insisted on cramming it into a suitcase. "For the memories, Mom," I said. The truth was, I kept it as a reminder. Never let anger take hold of your hands. Seattle greeted us with a cold, drizzling rain, but in my mother's eyes, it was a rain of golden opportunity. In the late 90s, Seattle was rising into a tech and real estate monster. Everywhere you looked, there were half-finished construction sites, cranes stabbing up into the gray sky, coffee shops packed with office workers, hammering away on the newest laptops. My mother was no longer the timid woman in the grease-stained apron. She took part of the dividend money, plus a mortgage against the Main Street block, whose value had already started ticking up as word of the highway leaked out, and bought outright a small condo and a commercial storefront sitting right on a corner. The city had slated for development. I still remember the day she went to sign the contract. She wore a beige overcoat she'd bought at a second-hand store, but she carried herself with such poise that the sly old broker didn't dare shortchange her by a dime. She asked the kinds of questions only an insider asks: floor area ratios, infrastructure zoning, disbursement deadlines. The broker started out planning to look down on some small-town woman, and within 10 minutes he was calling her ma'am with real respect. Our first night in the new condo, no creaky old furnace, no smell of mildew, no rats scratching in the ceiling. My mother pulled me into her arms. She said, "Emma, from now on, we never have to read anyone's face just to survive." I thought that was the end of the hard days. I was wrong. Because in this life, when you want peace, that's exactly when someone else refuses to let you have it. 1,000 miles away in Pennsylvania, Chloe still thought we were the losers who'd fled town with our tails between our legs. In her mind, the story was simple. An old wife, dumped by her husband, hauling a pile of worthless junk out of town, leaving the whole battlefield for her to claim. Every now and then, she'd come cruising back through the old town in my father's fancy car, circling the parking lot at Uncle Joe's garage just to show off. She'd flaunt the belly swelling under her expensive sweater. She spread it around to the old neighbors that my mother was a lunatic who'd run off with a pile of trash money, leaving her a perfect man and a fat fortune. My mother heard it all secondhand from Uncle Joe over the phone and just gave a faint smile. She couldn't be bothered. She was too busy renovating that commercial storefront, leasing it to a software startup at a sky-high rate, a company that, a few years later, would balloon 100-fold and drag my mother's rent right up into the clouds with it. But Uncle Joe wasn't about to let it slide. My uncle was a rough-cut mechanic, arms covered in tattoos, blunt as a hammer but sharp as a tack. He'd hated Richard for years, and he loved the two of us like his own. One night, he called us, his voice thick with mischief. "Sarah, that Chloe girl is not as simple as she looks. Yesterday, I saw her sneaking out of a cheap motel out by the edge of town, the Sunset. And the man with her wasn't Richard. It was Dan. Dan, the long-haul trucker, her old boyfriend from 3 years back. I recognized him right off. Those two are still carrying on." My heart skipped a beat. I was listening on the extension in the living room, gripping the receiver. My mother was strangely calm. "Do you have any proof?" "I got hold of the repair invoice on Dan's rig," Uncle Joe cackled through the phone. "He brought the truck into my shop. No idea who I am to you." And guess who paid? The name on the credit card was Chloe Baker. That girl's using Richard's money to bankroll her old flame. I've also got the invoice for a $60,000 semi-truck registered to Dan, paid off Chloe's card too. And I snapped a few photos of the two of them kissing out in the motel parking lot. My mother was quiet for a moment, then answered in a slow, cold voice. "Uncle Joe, keep this to yourself. Don't tell a soul. Develop the photos, copy every invoice, and send it all certified to Seattle. Let her keep playing her part. It's not time to bring the curtain down yet. This knife, we save it. I thought everything would go smoothly until my father's stock hit its peak and the two of us would live an easy life. But I'd underestimated how greedy and how cruel people can be. About 6 months later, when Chloe's belly had ballooned out, she started to grasp a bitter truth. She discovered the real worth of the fortune Richard had unwittingly signed over to me. Those 10% of shares in the trust weren't worthless paper, they were millions of dollars, earning more every single day as Apex Energy's stock climbed. Meanwhile, the child in her belly, heir in name only, had no guarantee on paper whatsoever because Richard was a calculating man. He'd married her to save face, but he still hadn't drawn up a will, still hadn't signed over a single official share to her or the baby. Envy and greed turned Chloe into a venomous snake. She couldn't stand the thought of that skinny little bookworm sitting pretty on millions, while she, the beauty, the pregnant one, had nothing to her name. She decided to make her move and rip away those 10% too. And she picked the single most vicious weapon a woman like her could think of. One Tuesday afternoon, just as I got home from high school, there was a knock at the door. 2 people in black suits, ID badges on their chests, stood stiffly in the hallway. Child Protective Services, CPS. "Ma'am, we received an anonymous call," the female caseworker said in a chilly voice, her eyes sweeping our condo like it was a crime scene. "The complainant alleges that Miss Sarah Baker shows signs of severe alcohol dependency, emotional instability, and regularly abuses her daughter. We need to conduct an investigation to assess whether you're fit to continue caring for Emma Baker." My ears started ringing. The ground seemed to drop out from under me. In America, a CPS investigation is one of the most terrifying sentences a parent can face. It can tear a family apart on nothing but an anonymous phone call. My mother stood frozen, the glass of water in her hand clenched so tight her knuckles went white. But she didn't shout, didn't protest. She simply, gently, invited the 2 officers in, poured them each a glass of water, and said in a calm voice, "Please, investigate. My house has nothing to hide." Chloe's intent was crystal clear. If CPS ruled my mother an unfit parent, custody of me would revert to my biological father, Richard. And of course, control of that multi-million-dollar trust would fall into his hands too, or rather, into Chloe's. A takedown that was vicious and clean all at once. No knife, no blood, just one phone call. All that week, our home was under siege. The caseworkers interviewed me at school, drew my mother's blood to test for alcohol, checked the fridge to see if we had enough food, opened the medicine cabinet, questioned the neighbors. Even though they found not one shred of evidence that my mother abused anyone or drank, because there was none, the humiliation and the mental strain bore down on her. The neighbors started whispering. People looked at my mother differently. That night I found my mother sitting alone out on the balcony, looking down at the glittering lights of Seattle. She was smoking a cigarette, something I'd never seen her do in all my years. "Mom," I said softly, stepping out and draping a jacket over her shoulders. "Let's sue her. For defamation." My mother took a long drag and exhaled the smoke into the cold night. Her eyes reflected the distant specks of light from the city, sharp and resolute. "No, Emma. Lawsuits take time, and she used a burner phone. We've got no proof she made the call. Going at it that way won't cut her throat." She stubbed out the cigarette and stood. Her spine straightened, like a sheet of steel just pulled from the forge. "They say when a dog bites you, don't bite it back. But if that dog means to tear out my child's throat, I won't bite back. I'll skin it alive right in the middle of the crowd, so everyone can see that under all that fur is a snake." She turned to me, her voice calm but carrying the weight of a mountain. "Emma, take tomorrow off school. Book me 2 business class tickets. We're going to Texas." That knife we've been saving for half a year, it's time to pull it out. Before we flew out, my mother did something I still admire to this day. She didn't rush off in a rage. She prepared. The truth is, she'd been preparing for a long time. Right after Uncle Joe's phone call 6 months earlier, she'd quietly hired a private investigation firm in Houston and let them work in silence for months. From the photos and invoices Uncle Joe had sent, they traced Richard's travel history and confirmed it. Around the exact time Chloe conceived, Richard was in Europe for a solid month, negotiating with investment funds for the IPO. They'd also legally obtained through a clinic Chloe herself had visited the ultrasound report establishing the age of the pregnancy. Chloe's anonymous CPS call hadn't scared my mother at all. It had only made up her mind to pull the knife she'd already sharpened out of its sheath. Every piece had been set in its place. My mother was no longer the woman grabbing a bat in a blind fury. She'd become a hunter, patiently loading each round into the chamber. Our last night in Seattle before the flight, I saw her stand a long time in front of the mirror, trying on a newly tailored navy blue suit. She looked at herself, and I heard her say quietly, almost to herself, "He called me an uneducated woman. Fine. Let's see what this uneducated head can win back." 2 days later, at one of the most luxurious 5-star hotels in downtown Houston, Texas, Richard Baker was throwing a reception for his major shareholders and banking partners, celebrating a wildly successful financial quarter for Apex Energy. It was the most glorious night of his life. He was standing at a peak his whole slum childhood had never dared to dream of. The ballroom overflowed with crystal light, the clink of champagne glasses, and rows of expensive formal wear. The most powerful men in the Texas energy industry were gathered here. Richard stood at the podium, imposing in his tuxedo, and beside him stood Chloe, radiant in a red evening gown, deliberately showing off her pregnant belly, building the image of a wealthy family about to welcome an heir. He raised his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's drink to a future in which Apex Energy will." He never finished the sentence. The towering oak doors of the ballroom swung open. No invitation. No warning. My mother walked in. She wasn't wearing that old, worn-out dress from years ago. That day, my mother wore a sharply tailored navy blue suit, her hair swept up elegantly, her stiletto heels striking crisp, deliberate beats across the red carpet, clack, 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 one step at a time, slow, like a clock, counting down to an execution. Beside her walked me no longer the timid little bookworm, but a young woman with her head held high, a folder tucked under her arm. The entire ballroom fell dead silent in an instant. The gentle music stuttered to a halt. Champagne glasses stopped midair. Richard's jaw dropped, the drink in his hand sloshing, a few drops spilling onto the carpet. Chloe went pale as a ghost. "Sarah? What the hell are you doing here?" Richard hissed, hurrying down off the podium, trying to cut her off before his partners noticed, the words grinding through his teeth. "Security. Who let her in?" My mother didn't slow down. She walked straight past him, straight to the center table, where the most powerful bank directors were seated, the very men who would decide the future of Richard's company. "I'm Sarah Baker," my mother announced, her voice ringing out clear enough for the whole ballroom to hear. "Your chairman's ex-wife." "I didn't come here to beg, Richard. I came to give you a belated wedding gift." She tossed a large brown folder onto the glass tabletop. It slid across the polished surface and came to rest right in front of Richard. "Open it," my mother ordered coldly. The crowd was starting to pay attention. Heads turned. A few bank directors raised their eyebrows. Richard glanced around, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. He couldn't refuse to open it, not with 100 eyes on him. His hands trembled as he tore open the folder. Color photographs spilled out across the table. Photos of Chloe wrapped around a rough-looking man in a parking lot. Photos of Chloe, and that same man walking out of a cheap motel, hand in hand, lips locked. A soft ooh rippled through the ballroom. A few people covered their mouths. A grande dame, dripping with diamonds at the next table, leaned over to whisper in her husband's ear. Richard stood frozen, the photograph shaking in his hand. What? What is this? That's not even the deadly part yet, Richard. My mother pulled 2 thin sheets of paper from her purse and held them up high for the whole room to see. This is the statement for the supplementary credit card you yourself gave Chloe. And this is the invoice for a $60,000 semi-truck, registered to one Dan Miller, the man in the photos, and your dear young wife's longtime lover. You work the gas fields, and your money flows straight into your wife's boyfriend's gas tank. The crowd around them began to murmur. The whispers spread fast as a brush fire, table to table. Did you hear that? Good Lord, Baker got cheated on? Richard's face lost every drop of color. He glared at Chloe, shaking all over. You took my money. To keep that piece of trash? Chloe trembled, tears pouring down, and lunged to clutch Richard's arm in front of the whole crowd. No, Richard. Believe me, she's lying. She forged these papers. I'm carrying your son, your own flesh and blood. That was exactly the line my mother had been waiting for. Chloe had just cocked the last gun with her own hands. My mother burst out laughing. A clear laugh, but dripping with mockery, echoing through the silent ballroom. She threw the last sheet of paper down on the table. It was the medical report her private investigators had obtained. The ultrasound shows the pregnancy is 36 weeks along, over 8 months, as of today. My mother spoke, every word landing like a driven nail. Richard, over 8 months ago, you were in Europe, negotiating the IPO for a solid month. There are 100 witnesses and a stack of plane tickets to prove it. So, unless your sperm can fly across the Atlantic, I'd suggest you start setting money aside to raise a child for that trucker. The baby in her belly doesn't carry the Baker name. It carries the name Miller. The whole ballroom erupted. And this, folks, is the moment I'll remember for the rest of my life. The entire ballroom, the same crowd that minutes ago had been bowing and scraping to Richard, turned on him all at once. First came the shock, 100 faces frozen. Then the whispers, no longer pitying, but dripping with ridicule. Then someone in the corner let out a snort of laughter. And the laughter spread from 1 person to 10, from 10 to the whole room. They weren't laughing at my mother. They were laughing at Richard. The bank directors, the men his entire business depended on, looked at him with contempt and derision. A man who beat his chest about being smart and ruthless in the boardroom, in the end got led around by the nose by a gold digger, cheated on, robbed right under his nose, and then paraded another man's baby around like it was his precious heir. The pride of an arrogant man, the pride he'd spent his whole life building to bury his slum childhood, was ground to dust on the most glorious night of his life. Richard staggered, clutching his chest. His face went from white to a furious red, then to a sickly gray. He shoved Chloe's hand away so hard she tumbled to the floor, her red gown fanning out across the carpet. And then all the rage, bottled up inside Richard, burst loose. He roared like a wounded animal, dropping every last shred of his phony politeness, jabbing a finger at Chloe as she scrambled on the floor. You venomous snake. You cheap, lying tramp. I fed you. I dressed you in the finest, hung diamonds around your neck so you could take my money and go keep some other man. You lied that it was my son, to bleed my whole fortune dry. Get out. Get out of my sight. Get out of Texas. You show your face around here again and I'll have my lawyers throw you in prison for fraud. Chloe wasn't going down without a fight. She screamed, mascara running down her cheeks in 2 black streaks, both hands still clawing at the hem of Richard's jacket. And what makes you so much better? You abandoned your wife and kid to chase after me. You think I loved your old ugly face? I loved your money. Just the money. A man who betrays his own wife and child deserves to get cheated on? You had it coming. Shut your mouth. Richard slapped at the air missing, thank God his voice cracking. You cheap piece of trash. Security. Drag this lunatic out of here. 2 security guards hauled Chloe up by the arms and dragged her toward the door. She kicked and screamed curses the whole way, her cursing echoing down the halls of that 5-star hotel. An entire empire of love and money, built on lies, collapsed right there in the middle of the ballroom, in front of the most powerful people in Texas. My mother stood there, in the middle of the chaos she'd created, as calm as a general who'd just finished off her enemy without a single drop of blood on her hands. She didn't need to scream. She didn't need to strike. She simply laid the truth on the table and let the greed of those two tear each other apart. She looked at Richard, the man who'd once called her an uneducated woman, slumped in a chair, both hands over his face, surrounded by the sneering laughter of the whole room. You called me uneducated, my mother said, her voice no longer raised, soft now as a breath, yet the whole room heard it. But an uneducated woman just taught this entire room full of economics PhDs a lesson. Whoever treats the human heart as worthless will, sooner or later, be ground to dust by it. She said not another word. She simply turned on her heel, took my hand, and walked out through those oak doors with her head high, each stiletto beat ringing out sharp and final on the red carpet, clack, 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 leaving behind her the collapse of a fraudulent empire. Out in the hallway, once the doors had closed behind us, I saw my mother's hand tremble slightly. She squeezed mine. "It's done, Emma," she whispered. I didn't have to break a single skull. I just had to hold up a mirror and let them look at themselves. In the months after that earthquake, everything fell into its proper orbit, like marbles rolling down grooves cut in advance. Chloe was thrown out without a cent to her name. Dan, the lover, abandoned her the moment the money dried up. Turns out his love was only as thick as Richard's wad of cash. She faced a fraud lawsuit from Richard's team of lawyers. The baby, Dan's child, she gave birth to and raised alone in a shabby apartment on the edge of town, the same kind of cheap motel district where she'd once snuck off to her trysts. The anonymous CPS complaint, of course, got tossed in the trash the moment her blackmail motive was exposed. The investigation into my mother was closed, clean. Richard's company reeled from the chairman's personal scandal. The banking partners, the men who'd watched him humiliated at his own banquet table, lost their faith. The stock slid for a while. But lucky for me, it survived and slowly recovered, enough that the 10% in my trust never turned into worthless paper. On the contrary, a few years later, it was worth even more. Richard himself, though, was a broken man. People no longer feared him. Behind his back, they called him a nickname a proud man can never wash off. And the Main Street block? Just like I'd read on those zoning maps, a year later, the interstate highway broke ground and ran right past it. Those run-down little shops Chloe had sneered at now sat right on the frontage of a major traffic interchange. Land prices jumped tenfold. Uncle Joe leased the whole block out on our behalf, convenience stores and a gas station. Every month, the rent flowed in like clockwork. Have fun scraping by on those run-down little shops. Sure, Chloe. We scraped by on them all right. And they kept us living very, very well. One autumn afternoon the following year, my mother and I were sitting and enjoying coffee in that commercial storefront we'd bought in Seattle, now renovated into a small but elegant bistro, warm wood floors, paintings on the walls, customers coming and going when a figure appeared outside the window, hesitating in the drizzle. It was Richard. He looked decades older. His hair had gone gray and unkempt, his suit rumpled, none of that gleaming arrogance left in it. The shoulders that once squared with such self-satisfaction now sagged. He came in, the door chime jingling, carrying an expensive gift box tied with a ribbon, his eyes hesitant, timid as a beggar, standing at a rich man's door. Our bistro, warm, fragrant with coffee, only made his ruin stand out more. He sat down in the chair across from my mother without waiting to be invited. The hands that had once so ruthlessly signed those divorce papers, that had shoved the $20,000 across the table at her, now trembled as they nodded together. Sarah. Emma. His voice was hoarse, cracking. I'm sorry. These past months, I've been living in hell. I was blind. I lost everything that ever really mattered. Money, reputation. I have it all, and I've got no one. He looked at my mother with pleading eyes, rimmed red. I know I'm a bastard. I know it. But could we? Could we start over? I'll sell every share in Texas, move to Seattle. I'll start from scratch, be a decent husband, a decent father. We'll be a family again. Don't you remember the old days, when we were poor but happy? I sat still, watching my mother. My heart beat quietly. I wanted to know whether the woman who'd sacrificed 18 years for this man, who'd knelt weeping on that porch for him, would feel even the faintest stir of pity at his ruin. My mother set down her coffee cup. She didn't frown. She wasn't angry. There wasn't a shred of pity in her eyes either. She looked at him with the utter calm of someone standing in a completely different league, not a league of money, but of a soul that had moved on and let go. Richard, my mother's voice was gentle, but cold as ice. You don't owe me an apology, and I don't need one anymore. A woman's heart doesn't die in a single day. It goes cold, over and over again, with every crumpled check you mailed home, every winter I slept in 3 layers of sweaters, every time you called me uneducated. By the day you brought that girl home, it had already gone cold for good. All those years weren't for you. They were just a wrong road I walked when I was young. Now I'm on the right one. She gently pushed the gift box back toward him, not bothering to open it. You know the worst thing I could do to you, Richard. It isn't hating you. Hating you would mean you still mattered. The worst thing is this. I look at you now and I feel nothing at all. You're just not interesting to me anymore. Don't come here again. You'll bother my customers. Richard looked as if a hand had closed around his throat. He understood the door had shut for good. There was no forgiveness. And there was no more revenge to be had either. My mother had simply outgrown him, left him behind, at the bottom of the very pit his own choices had dug. He covered his face, rose heavily, left the gift box on the table, and walked out the door, dissolving into the misty fog of Seattle. I watched his stooped back disappear into the rain and felt a lightness spread through my whole body. Not gloating, just the relief of a final chapter, closed at last. That August, I got my acceptance letter to a prestigious university in Seattle finance. The girl who'd once biked 4 miles to the library to dig up a single scrap of IPO news would now study the very trade that had saved her whole family. On enrollment day, I handed the registrar a name change certificate. I was no longer Emma Baker, the name a careless father had tossed at me without a thought. I chose a new name for myself. I am Victoria. In Latin, it means victory, a symbol of the rebirth of 2 women who'd reached into the mud of betrayal and pulled their own destiny back out with their bare hands. And that aluminum baseball bat? It didn't end up in the trash, and it no longer stood gathering dust in the corner. My mother hung it on the wall of the bistro, behind the coffee counter, right where she stood every day. When customers asked, she'd just smile. A keepsake. But I knew. Every time we looked at that bat, the 2 of us remembered the afternoon she'd nearly swung it. Remembered the dry times, clack times, of it hitting the hardwood. Remembered that it was the moment she put it down, not the moment she picked it up, that was the moment she truly won. That bat up on the wall was a daily reminder. Anger in your hands can only shatter a car window, but a cool head can win back an entire life. We didn't need a miracle. We didn't need to see the future. There was no fairy godmother who appeared to grant two women a wish. All we had was a stack of documents hidden under a sofa cushion, a cool head, and the courage to put the bat down at the right moment. And if this story leaves you with just one thing, I hope it's this. A woman's fate must never be gambled on the heart of any man. Bet it on your own clear head instead. I'm a different person today. The skinny, bespectacled Emma of years ago used to believe justice was something the heavens handed down, that if you suffered enough, endured enough, you'd be repaid in the end. No. The Victoria of today understands that justice isn't given. It's something you take back with your own two hands. They say that when you're backed into a corner, pick up a weapon and fight. Here's what I say to you instead. Your sharpest weapon is never the bat in your hands. It's the head on your shoulders. Just dare to put that baseball bat down, use your reason to negotiate, and take one step forward. And every rain, in the end, will pass. If you've ever been looked down on because you were poor, because you were uneducated, because you were just the cleaning lady in someone's eyes, then let me tell you this. The very people who get looked down on the most, when they keep a cool head, turn out to be the most dangerous of all. Don't let anger make you the one in a jail cell. Let a clear head make you the one who walks out the door with her chin up. And if you've ever had a put the bat down moment of your own, a time you swallowed your anger to choose the wiser road, I want to hear it in the comments below. Your story might just be the bat someone else needs to set down. If this story moved you, leave a like, share it with a woman you think needs to hear it, and subscribe so we can keep listening together to stories of the underestimated who rose up. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next story.